everyone. Welcome to Makash 50, one of my favorite rooms on campus, and especially for an auspicious occasion like this one. I'm Jill Dolan, I'm the Dean of the College, and I'm honored to be introducing today's discussion, which is called, What is the Point of a Liberal Arts Education? The discussion is sponsored by the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions, and I think I speak for all of us when we say we're just delighted to see so many of you here. As the Dean of the College, I'm cheered to see this program staged on our campus. Princeton offers a world-class liberal arts education in the context of a distinguished research university. By treating our students as equal partners in the production of knowledge, we meet the challenge of attending to undergraduate education while producing groundbreaking research. Our senior thesis requirement, our junior papers, and our commitment to other undergraduate research opportunities means that in the context of a broad-based education, our students gather the skills and methods required to propel them forward across frontiers of knowledge, regardless of where they turn their professional attentions. I'm also compelled by the topic at hand because, as we all know, the liberal arts as a foundation for education have been under attack as of late. There are those, in fact, who would replace the project of developing and accumulating knowledge by studying, for instance, history, philosophy, political theory, and the arts with an approach to education as purely instrumental job training. I believe we can do better than that. Recent political discourse, in what I personally, I have to say, find a tragic election season, regardless of how any of us might vote, demonstrates that more than ever, a liberal arts education should prepare students for citizenship, for participating in a democracy that cherishes civil, educated discourse. What is a university for, if not to practice debating with one another? What is a liberal arts education for, if not to hone the skills of argument and evidence? What is any education for, if it doesn't teach respect and empathy for perspectives vastly different from our own? I continue to hope that the kind of rigorous, multifaceted liberal arts education we provide to Princeton students will indeed influence the next generation of American citizens to be thoughtful, careful, and respectful when they enter the public sphere to advance their ideas. The two distinguished speakers addressing us tonight have an ongoing conversation in which they model just such a congenial confrontation across different perspectives. Cornel West is lecturer with the rank of professor in the James Madison program here at Princeton and class of 1943 university professor in the Center, or now the Department of African American Studies, emeritus. Professor West has a PhD in philosophy from Princeton and has received more than 20 honorary doctorates. Over the course of his career as a scholar and public intellectual, he has taught at Yale, Harvard, the University of Paris, and most recently, the Union Theological Seminary. He's written and edited over 30 books, including Race Matters and Democracy Matters, and his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. Professor West is also well known as a justice and anti-poverty activist. He's co-chaired the Democratic Socialists of America, is a founder of the Network of Spiritual Progressives, and he participated in President Bill Clinton's National Conversation on Race. He has an expressed passion to invite a variety of people from all walks of life into his world of ideas, to keep alive, he tells us, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. That is, a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and to justice. Robert P. George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program here at Princeton. He has also taught at Harvard Law School. In November, Oxford University will confer on him one of its highest honors, the advanced doctorate known as the Doctor of Civil Law degree. Professor George also holds 19 honorary doctorates from universities in the United States and Europe. In addition, always good to start with a handshake. In addition to his academic work, he too has a distinguished career in public service. He's been chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, a member of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights, and the U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Science and Technology. Professor George is also the author of many books, from Making Men Moral, Civil Liberties and Public Morality, which was published in 1993, to his most recent, Conscience and Its Enemies. He's a recipient of the U.S. Presidential Citizens Medal and many other national and international honors. Last year, he received Princeton's President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. Please join me in welcoming Professors Cornel West and Robbie George.
Well, on behalf of Professor West and myself, I want to thank all of you for coming out to spend a little time with us this afternoon talking about a profoundly important issue, not only for us here at Princeton, but really for the entire country. The point, the purpose of liberal arts learning. And also, on behalf of Cornel and myself, I want to say a special thank you to our Dean, Jill Dolan, for adjusting her schedule, moving things around in order to be with us today. Dean Dolan is, of course, herself a distinguished scholar in the liberal arts who has given us all the gift of stepping up into administration, which is something of a burden for scholars. It means giving up what you really love, which is teaching and scholarship for a while in order to serve the scholarly community, students and faculty alike. So thank you very much, Jill. And what a blessing to be again in conversation, in public conversation with my very dear brother, and he is a brother to me, Cornel West. We've been at this now for almost a decade, teaching courses together, going around the country, engaging in dialogues on all sorts of subjects, finding our points of agreement, engaging our points of disagreement, and loving each other and learning from each other. It's been one of the greatest blessings of my life, Cornel, and thank you. Thank you for it.
I appreciate it.
If you'll indulge me, I'd like to begin autobiographically. I promise I'll get that part over with quickly and delve more deeply into the substance, but perhaps when I say what I'm going to say autobiographically, you'll see how it relates to the topic for today, and it might touch a point of resonance with some of you. I come from humble origins. My grandparents were immigrants here. None of them had more than an elementary school education. One of them didn't even have that. My parents did not go to college. Their parents settled in Appalachia because the coal mining was there. And I was, my father was saved from the coal mines by World War II, so I was saved from the coal mines by World War II. But growing up with parents who had not had the opportunity for much education, liberal arts or otherwise, we were urged to do the best we could in school, to get the best education that we could possibly obtain. By we, I mean myself and my four brothers. But mainly for what Dean Dolan referred to as instrumental purposes. My parents knew that education was very, very important. Not the most important thing. The most important thing for them was for their sons to be decent and good men. But next was to be decently educated. But why? Because they saw it as the ticket to social economic advancement, to upward social mobility. And of course they were right about that. But what they didn't have much of a conception of was the point of education, the point of knowledge, the point of truth-seeking, the point of intellectual activity for its inherent enrichments. To go back to that term Dean Dolan introduced, and to revise it slightly, non-instrumental purposes. That was something that their own lack of experience with education put somewhere beyond their reach. So I only began to develop an appreciation for liberal arts education as such, that is, learning for its own sake, for the life of the mind, when I was fortunate enough to be able to go off to college, very good liberal arts college, off to Swarthmore College, and learn from my fellow students, and especially from a handful of terrific professors who taught me by both precept and example the inherent, non-instrumental value, the intrinsic enrichments of liberal arts education. And that now is the gospel I want to preach. I want to preach it to you. I know I'm preaching to the choir in many cases out there. The fact that you're here might very well mean that you're the choir. And I preach it to my students. I try not to do too much, as Cornel and I have taught together a number of times, and neither of us tries to do too much preaching to our students. But this is one message that I do preach: the importance of not reducing your education at Princeton or Swarthmore or Stanford or the University of Oklahoma or Ohio Wesleyan, reducing it to purely instrumental purposes. Because there's a richness, there's a greatness, there's a deep, profound value in knowledge, in understanding, in the intellectual life for its own sake. It's not that it will necessarily make you happier. If you want that, order some Valium. But I believe it will make you better, richer. Not necessarily morally better. Some of the morally finest people, beginning with my grandparents I have ever known, have not had much education or the opportunity to develop an appreciation for knowledge for its own sake. But it will give you the enrichment of being able to lead an examined life. Not simply, when it works, not simply to be moved in your activities and in your relationships and in your choices by your feelings or emotions or the trends or the fads or what the crowds are doing or what the beautiful people think or what the rich or the powerful, the famous believe and think you should believe, but rather by your own hard-earned judgments, hard-earned by thinking to the ends that you will in fact pursue, the choices that you will in fact make. And my proposition is that that in itself is an inherent fulfillment of each of us as human persons, as rational animals, as people blessed, as creatures blessed with intellectual powers. Now, when I say that it won't necessarily make you morally better, I want to modify or temper that by saying that the virtues that it will require include virtues that make you, insofar as you practice them, morally better. Especially the virtues of honesty, because there can be no authentic truth-seeking without the virtue of honesty, and the virtue of humility. There can be no serious intellectual truth-seeking unless one is sufficiently humble to recognize that he or she at any point on any question at any time might be wrong, and therefore has an overwhelmingly good reason to listen, not just to hear, but to listen to somebody who's got a different point of view, who sees things from a different perspective, who's reached a different conclusion. And I'm sure in the course of our dialogue, Cornel and I will delve into that issue a bit more deeply. Now, one final thing before I turn it over for a while to Brother Cornel. There is an argument that you will hear, indeed you have heard, that attempts to save liberal arts education from its critics, and Dean Dolan is right, the critics are out there. Critics who think that your time and your parents' money and our society's resources are being wasted on useless topics like philosophy and English literature and history and Near Eastern studies, or for that matter, pure science. So there's an argument out there. There's an attempt that you'll hear and have heard, I'm sure, to save it by saying, well, liberal arts education is worthwhile for a society and should be invested in because liberal arts education teaches you to be a critical thinker, and that's going to make you a better employee or a better business person or a better professional, no matter what field you go into. Now, the trouble with that argument is not that it's just plain false. In fact, as far as it goes, it is true. A liberal arts education will make you a critical thinker, a better critical thinker, a more critical thinker, and that's going to be valuable whether you go into banking, international development and relief work, law, medicine, the insurance business, no matter what it is. But notice that that argument also, if it stops there, if that's the justification, is just a refined, souped-up version of the instrumentalization of liberal arts education. It's trying to save liberal arts education and the justification for investing resources, time and money in it by showing once again its instrumental value. And it is true, as I say, it's got great instrumental value. But we've got to go beyond that because it's critically important that we appreciate what's foundational, and that is it's more than merely instrumental value. It's inherent value. The value that comes from understanding, engaging, and appreciating the thought of Plato. Dante's Divine Comedy. Shakespeare. The Witness of Martin Luther King. Locke's political philosophy. Al-Ghazali and the great Muslim scholars. All of that possibility for intellectual engagement and learning provides inherent enrichment for each of us as the kind of creatures we are. Creatures who are indeed blessed with an intellect and will therefore flourish or fail to flourish in respect of our intellectual development, just as we will flourish or fail to flourish as biological creatures in respect of our physical health, or flourish or fail to flourish as social beings in respect of our friendships or other relationships, or flourish or fail to flourish in respect of our moral well-being, our character, by doing good acts or by doing bad acts, by acquiring virtues or falling into vices. Among the fulfillments of the human person, available through choices and action, are the fulfillments available through inquiry, understanding, deliberation, engagement, knowledge. It's not the only one, but it's a critically important one to who we are. My dear brother.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a blessing to be back at Princeton and be in dialogue with my dear brothers. 10 years slipped by so quickly. We first met there in the Corwin Hall. Initiated our dialogue with Brother Andrew. And I do have a deep love for Brother Robert. We've been up and we've been down. We've been in a variety of different communities, vanilla suburbs, chocolate cities. We've been in hospital rooms. I've taught in prisons for many years. I tried to get him into a prison, but it didn't work, but we're still working on it. But he was willing to come. But that's the depth of our commitment to not just Socratic dialogue, but to a friendship that cuts across race and cuts across ideological and political differences. It's true we both are Christians, but we different kind of Christians theologically and philosophically. So he's got a lot of Thomas Aquinas all shot through him. I've got a lot of Kierkegaard shot through me, but we do come together as human beings as well as persons who attempt to take seriously the gospel as we understand it. And I salute him that I am who I am because somebody loved me and somebody cared for me, somebody attended to me. The highest honor I'll ever receive, being the second son of Clifton and Irene West. And I'm a product of Shiloh Baptist Church on the tropical side of Sacramento, California. And it was there wrestling with the book of Job, Hebrew scripture, Sunday school and vacation Bible school. I first began to deal with what textbooks call the problem of evil, but what I call the catastrophes in the human condition. And understanding that human English coming from Latin humando, burial, we're the kind of beings on the way to burial. And the question is, what kind of human beings will we choose to be in the short time we have from mama's womb to tomb? And that for me is humanities. That's what it's about. The radical contingency and fragility and vulnerability, as well as the joys and the majesty of being human in the short amount of time allocated to us by choice or fortune in time and space. Exactly. Just what I'm talking about, right? That's exactly right. Express yourself, little precious one. Absolutely. But to begin on the autobiographical note, I grew up in Sacramento in a very closely knit black community and church with Little League and music and so forth. And when I went off to Harvard, I was deeply loved by some of the towering figures in the golden age of American philosophy of John Rawls and Nelson Goodman and W.B. Quine, and Israel Scheffler and Robert Nozick, Stanley Cavell, Hillary Putnam. I was blessed to teach with Putnam. These people loved me to death when I came here to Princeton. Similarly so with Richard Rorty and Sheldon Wolin and Walter Kaufman invited me into their homes, so that I was blessed to be on this love train, and it spilled over. And the love train had to do with something very basic, I think, that sits at the very center of what the point of liberal arts education is all about. It's the love of truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. It's the love of the good that has to do with the enabling virtue of courage, all the other virtues, shallow, hollow, unless we accent courage. It's love of the holy for me as a religious person. That's why Abraham Joshua Heschel means so much. That's why Martin King means so much. That's why Dorothy Day means so much. And Phil Berrigan means so much. We can go on and on. Brother Roberto's book just came out today on the American prophets, A.J. Muste, and Fannie Lou Hamer. These are people who had a moral and spiritual lens through which they viewed the world. Now, because I think we live in a moment in which our civilization is undergoing such profound spiritual decay and pervasive moral decline, that when you think of liberal arts education and the way we've always talked about it, in terms of paideia, the Greeks call paideia, and I'm just blessed to have my freshman seminar. I'm teaching a course on Heschel and King. Just wonderful students going back and forth back. But we began with paideia, deep education, not cheap schooling. Learning how to die. Love of wisdom, philosophy, meditation on and preparation for death, Plato says. learning how to die, mustering the courage to critically examine assumptions and presuppositions and let some of them go. You examine your prejudgments and prejudices and let some of them go. And when you let some of them go, that is a form of death on the way to what deep education is about, which is the formation of wise attention, the shift from superficial things to the things that really matter. And most of American culture today is what? A joyless quest for pleasure with the deployment of massive weapons of distraction for money making. And I'm not just talking about the debate last night, but we could start there. Spiritual decay and moral decline. And not all on one side, even though one side has more than the other. We got to be honest about that. Absolutely. Because we're talking about something that cuts, because I view both of the candidates as on a continuum with me. They're fellow human beings, they're fellow Americans, they're products of the same civilization. They just made different kind of choices, but in fact, there was a connection between them and each and every one of us. They are the products of something that has taken place in the development of this culture and civilization, and it has something to do with the fact that paideia, deep education, that puts a premium on integrity, not cupidity and venality, not love of money and selling your soul for a mess of porridge, which everything and everybody is up for sale. Integrity puts a stress on honesty, as was noted. It's a wonderful essay by Kierkegaard he wrote at the end of his life. He said, what I really want in life is to be honest. And he said, I know that's a pagan virtue and I'm a Christian, but I got to work it out. I just want to be honest. And we know we all fall short of integrity and honesty. But anybody who takes integrity and honesty seriously, pillars of liberal arts education, is countercultural in our moment. I don't care what your ideology of politics. You're countercultural. Because the rule of big money, the rule of ubiquitous commodification, means integrity and honesty is always a secondary thought. Martin Luther King Jr. used to talk about this in terms of the shift from 10th commandment to the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And he wasn't just talking about the business page, the newspaper, scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal. Shot through all of our institutions, he said. But liberal arts education is about this wise attention. How do we get people, especially our precious young folk of all colors, to attend to the things that matter? And then muster the courage to cultivate a self that is self-critical. Dogma, doctrine across the board, even though we all will end up with certain kind of dogma doctrine, no such thing as a dogma-less perspective or presupposition-less perspective. We all will be tied to certain traditions, or we're going to be self-critical within those traditions of self, society, community. And then the production of a compassionate soul, full of empathy and imagination and a willingness to look at the world outside of the dominant paradigms of our disciplines, of mass media, to cut against the grain. It's always important to remind ourselves when we talk about liberal arts education. Socrates, founding father of so much of the best, the philosophical tradition in the West. I mean, the East and others have magnificent tradition. We're talking about, I'm thinking primarily of the West. Condemned to death, Jesus crucified. Dante, exile, a bounty on his head. Cervantes, imprisoned, tortured. Hobbes, Descartes, exile. Martin King assassinated, Virginia Woolf suicide. What a cost for those who are willing to engage in deep paideia, which means it's not a selling point. You come in and get some of this deep paideia and see what happens to you. It's going to unsettle your Martha's Vineyard vacation. You know what I mean? Oh. No, something's at stake here. What kind of human being you're going to be in light of a world that's overwhelmed with so much social misery and socially induced forms of suffering, and yet you still have a smile on your face and joy in your soul and have friendships with a whole host of different kinds of. That's one of the things that we've had fun doing, because I think over the years we've been able to exemplify, not just in words, but in our friendship, what it is to be wedded to paideia, that then has psychic, spiritual dimensions of a friendship, even as we disagree, because I still think Brother Robbie's wrong on a whole lot of things. And he thinks I'm wrong on a whole lot of things, and we're not relativists. Somebody's right or wrong about this. No, indeed. And we wrestle with it day in and day out, and week in and week out, whether he's bouncing back from whatever illness, or whether I'm dealing with a death in the family, and we can talk and pray and wrestle and so forth and so on. Right ahead,
Good. Cornel raised another virtue, and that's the virtue of courage. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of that virtue in liberal arts education. Yeah, sometimes it takes courage to speak the truth because people don't want to hear it. Sometimes powerful people don't want to hear it, or they don't want an issue to even be explored or engaged. And power can come from all sorts of sources. It may be people who have a lot of economic power, maybe people who have military power, or power to command the police forces and have a knock on the door in the night and take you off to jail, or worse. Or it may just be what John Stuart Mill, I'm going to talk more about him in a minute, called the power of public opinion. That pressure to go along, to conform, to be in line with what everybody else is thinking. And it does take courage. My brother Cornel's right. It does take courage to stand up to that. But there's an even more compelling issue requiring courage when it comes to liberal arts education. If you're going to be serious about it, if you are actually going to get a liberal arts education, which is not something Cornel or Jill or I can give, or any professor can give you, we just help you along. You give it to yourself, you as students. It's not something that you just take in. It's something you do, and we're just here to assist. But if you're going to do it, it's going to take not only honesty, not only humility, it's going to take courage, and here's why. A liberal arts education can only be pursued if you're open to truth, if that's what your goal is, finding it. As Cornel said, we're not relativists. And if you are willing to face the possibility that you might be wrong. And that's scary. It's scary because we build our identities to some significant extent around our opinions. Some opinions we cherish. It's not just what we happen to think. We fall in love with them. And in itself, that's not bad, because Cornel and I are the last people who are going to tell you don't be people of conviction. Don't go out there and advocate for what you believe. Don't go out there and fight for what you believe. Well, we can't say that. We'd be hypocrites if we'd say that. I know hypocrisy is in fashion these days, but I still don't think we want to be hypocrites. But there's a downside, a dark side, a danger. We fall so in love with our opinions. We build our identities around our ideologies to the point where we don't want to confront the possibility that we're wrong. We don't want to confront the possibility of having to change our minds, because we don't know who we will be then. It's like getting on a train, and you know you're going to get off at a station somewhere, but you don't know where. You don't know the name of that station or what it's going to be like there. Now you think of the great intellectual and spiritual transformations of history. People like St. Augustine. Cornel and I have always taught St. Augustine in the courses that we teach together. We teach the Confessions, and it's a great story of his transformation. And there are many such stories, sometimes in a religious tradition, sometimes in an intellectual tradition. There have been many great transformations where people have changed, but always with difficulty. And always requiring an enormous amount of courage. Not to face what other people might do to you, to face yourself and the possibility of not knowing who you will be when you end up wherever it is you end up. Or will you, not knowing what community you will belong to? Because very often we do belong to communities integrated around certain beliefs, values, convictions, and things. Cornel and I can both tell you from experience, including very recent experience, what it's like to come under pressure from people in your political or ideological community to stay on the side, stay on the platform here, to stay with us, stick with us, hold your nose and support this candidate. We've both been there. And you know what? Friends can become very unfriendly very quickly when you say, no, I can't do it. Can't do that consistent with my own integrity. I can't be a team player. Sorry, I'd love to be a team player. Try to be a team player when I can. Can, no, do. Give you the shirt off my back, but not my integrity. That's the one thing, it's not mine to give. I cannot give up. Now to John Stuart Mill and courage. Mill tells us in the great second chapter of his very important essay on liberty. I've made something of a career of being a critic of the kind of liberalism represented by Mill in On Liberty, but I have a profound appreciation for him and for that work. He's a secularist, I'm not. He's a utilitarian, I'm a critic of utilitarianism. And there's a kind of liberalism that Mill represents, a kind of progressivism that Mill represents that I'm not buying. And yet, he had a great mind. He makes me think. He's got serious arguments. And sometimes those arguments I find 100% persuasive. And if you go to that great chapter 2, which is entitled Of Freedom of Thought and Expression. Thought, not just expression. Thought and expression. You'll find Mill making wonderful points, including this one. If you have an intelligent critic, if there's an intelligent person with whom you disagree, and the human condition is such that intelligent people are going to disagree about things, including very important things. That's the way it is. There are really three possibilities. He talks about two, but I'm going to add a third. There are three possibilities. One, you both could be wrong. And you're both just missing something important about the situation. I mean, if it's a Marxist arguing with a Hegelian, I think they're probably both wrong. But there are two other possibilities. You could be wrong and your interlocutor could be right. Now, if we're serious about liberal arts education, if we have a serious appreciation of the value of truth for its own sake, and we're in that situation, and our opponent, our interlocutor, is able to show us the error in our thinking, moving us from error or ignorance to truth, or at least nearer to truth, giving us good arguments for changing our minds, if we have the courage to do it, then we have just been given a magnificent gift. That so-called opponent is the best friend a guy could have. That opponent has just given you the gift of truth. And we've all had that experience, haven't we? At least in small things. Having our minds changed on some question or issue by our engagement with another person. So you want to be grateful. You ought to thank that person. And then there's the one other possibility. Maybe you're right and that person's wrong. But Mill reminds us that even there, not only should we not try to shut down that guy, not let him speak, not let him be heard, intimidate him into silence, or try to buy him off if nothing else works. Not only that, we should listen to him very, very, very carefully. Because if an intelligent person can make that error, there's something to be learned even from the error. By figuring out where the mistake is made, one will deepen one's own understanding of the truth that one does hold, and more powerfully, more profoundly appropriate that truth. It's one thing to understand that something is the case. If you understand that something is the case, that it is the case, then you're right, you have a truth. But that's at a very superficial level. Real knowledge is not only knowing that something is the case, but why it's the case. And in many instances, understanding the deeper, larger, lasting, perhaps, significance of that truth, perhaps even existential significance of that truth. Very often the issues we debate are not issues where to have it right means to be able to check the right box, true or false. The issues we face are issues that need to be explored all the way down, need to be understood deeply. Issues whose existential significance has to be grasped. People have spent a whole lifetime exploring truths, even when they know what the right answer is to check the box. That's what liberal arts education fundamentally is. It's not having all the information correct, because knowledge isn't just information. And it's not just skill acquisition. It's great that the university gives you information. You need to know the facts. You're going to do American history, you need to know the facts. Just about any other area, certainly in the sciences, you need to know the facts. But knowledge is not just facts, or even the relationship of facts to each other. And it's not just the acquisition of skills, although it's great that the university is teaching you skills, including above all the skill of critical thinking, especially in the humanities and social sciences, and the scientific method in the sciences. But it is more than that. It's what Professor West has in mind when he speaks of paideia, deep education. Deep education is not at the check-the-box level. That's not deep. That's the opposite. That's superficial. Deep education is exploring why something is the case, understanding the competing arguments that intelligent, well-motivated, well-informed people make for different points of view, and understanding the significance. How can it be that great figures, just take our own field of philosophy, that great figures, just contemporary thinkers, John Rawls, who was so important to Brother Cornel, Alasdair MacIntyre, so important to me. How can they spend a lifetime disagreeing? These men are off the charts brilliant. And talk about a body of knowledge, masters of the tradition of moral and political philosophy. They've read it all, read and deeply understood it all, and yet they profoundly disagree, because that is the human condition. And in their engagement with each other, sometimes through written texts, sometimes in personal meetings, or in my interaction with Professor West, we deepen our understanding on both sides. When Rawls and MacIntyre engage, they both deepen their understanding, even if they don't move an inch on the check-the-box level. Understanding is deepened, and that's what makes those conversations so worthwhile. Now, of course, it's better to check the box right than wrong. We do want to have the correct answer, and Cornel and I, as we say, are both anti-relativists. We're not going to say there's no right answer, so just think whatever you want to think and just try to explore it as deep down as you can. And sometimes the answer for me or for you in our own existential situation is, we don't know the right answer. We're going to have to explore that one more deeply. We may spend a lifetime exploring it more deeply without having a settled opinion. Still, in the exploration, there is enrichment. And that's the beauty of liberal arts education. Cornel, what do you think?
You know, I think of three products of Princeton liberal arts education. Norman Thomas, class 1905. When Joe Wilson was asked, who was your most brilliant student? He said Norman Thomas. And they did not agree politically, ideologically, towering. Or Edward Zaid, Princeton liberal arts education. Truth teller, witness bearer, to the degree to which he was willing to lay bare his soul, present his arguments, and engage in the counter arguments. Then the third would be, of course, my dear brother Ralph Nader, who's still going. And he carries that Princeton liberal arts education with him. Now, what is it about these three who filter through? Now, this is during the patriarchal phase of Princeton's history, which was long. We haven't had the entree of the brilliant sisters of all colors yet. What, about 69 or so, I think they opened the patriarchal gates and let the rest of humanity in. Based on meritocratic criteria, of course. But what was distinctive about all three of them was that based on integrity, honesty, decency, courage, their truth-telling, their level of beauty and goodness, all three were secular. The holy they held at arm's length. Was that they dealt with catastrophes, usually denied. Catastrophes that can be denied even by liberal arts education. Structures of domination. It could be slavery, it could be Jim Crow, it could be patriarchy, it could be ugly forms of homophobia, and lose sight of precious gay and lesbians and bisexual and transgender folk. It could be deeply anti-Jewish, of course. The institution has a long anti-Semitic history up until the 1950s. It could be anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-indigenous peoples, and so forth. But it was a humanist education that provided them with empathy, sensibility, provided them with analytical tools, provided them with the courage to make some connection between their theory of what was going on and their willingness to embody and enact it in their lives, in their practice, in their deeds, in their action. All of them fallible. All three of them wrong about certain things, right about a whole lot of things. But how are we to be inspired in our day, and especially young students today? Because I see one of the major challenges to liberal arts education is the culture of smartness and dollars. There's a wonderful line in W. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk, 1903, when he talked about what happens to black people when they become thoroughly assimilated into the dusty desert of dollars and smartness. And I'm tied to wisdom, not smartness. Let the phones be smart. I want to be wise. Qualitatively different. All you have to do is watch television. Watch how many times the talking heads use the word obviously. Did you notice that? Every other third sentence. Obviously, nothing obvious. Lay out the argument. Where's the evidence? Nothing obvious. Obviously, it's an in-crowd word to be part of the culture of smartness. But smartness has its own parochialism and provincialism that doesn't raise certain kind of questions, that doesn't attend to certain kind of realities. Just to be part of the in-crowd, mainstream, streamlined, smart, even if Spielberg read the fiction now, you can hardly even read a review of a novel. This is a smart novel. That ain't telling me nothing. This is a smart choice. Smart. You think Chekhov was smart? You think Shakespeare is smart? You think John Coltrane's music is smart? How shallow, how hollow, how empty, how unimaginative. That's our day. And it's tied to what? Success defined in terms of dollars. Money, mansions, trophy spouses. Cuts both ways. It's empty. Heschel said it's spiritual blackout. And he was talking about the Jewish community. He hadn't got to the rest of us yet. But Heschel was courageous. He said, what happens when a rich, deep tradition of paideia finds itself more and more emptied out by commodification? Emptied out by obsession with smartness tied to money rather than witness tied to compassionate witness of a compassionate life before the worms get you. That's the challenge to our young people. And that's one of the reasons why the new moral and spiritual awakening is so very important. You see, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, and so forth. We can argue back and forth in terms of different voices and streams and strands and so on, but there's an attempt to say, look, there's got to be something more in life. There's a deeper hunger and thirst than just smartness and dollars, than just living large in some vanilla suburb. There's got to be something more, something that leave the world just a little better in the face of the overwhelming ecological catastrophe that's impending, nuclear catastrophe as the tensions with Russia escalate. And we know the political catastrophe in terms of the dysfunctional system, the economic catastrophe in terms of inequality, and the spiritual catastrophe in terms of escalating indifference and callousness toward the suffering of the best, and the best of Hebrew scripture, the spreading of Hesed, loving kindness to orphan and widow and fatherless and motherless, downtrodden, and those whose humanity is overlooked, no matter who they are. And that's what, to me, is a major challenge. And this is, again, this is not a question of indoctrination. It's certainly not a question of one ideology. But it is a question of wrestling with this issue of what it means to be human.
Which is the central question. Now, I guess it falls to me to defend money. That was a joke. I do agree that the desire for money often leads people astray. But I've noticed over my 31 years of teaching very, very bright students who have the kingdoms of the world laid out before them.
In the biblical sense.
In the biblical sense. It's not money as such, to me, Cornel. My impression, it is not, often, it is not money it's as such that is the motivator or the thing that takes people off the track. Sometimes it's what money represents. When I see young men and women going astray, it's more often the desire for status, prestige, acceptance among the powerful, the people who count, the influencers. And money very often is just a means to that. And that's when I want to say to them, and like you, I do say to them, think about whether that's what you think life is about. Take Plato's advice and look at your decision today from the perspective of your death. From that perspective, looking back over your life, when you are on your deathbed, when you're contemplating what will be on your tombstone, do your choices today reflect what you hope will be there? Or is there really not all that much that's great about prestige and power and influence and money, whether for its own sake or as a means to those things? Why will people not allow themselves to be challenged? Why do sometimes people refuse to change their opinions or change their ways, even when they know they should, or at least open themselves to argument? Very often it's because they're afraid that that will hold out the possibility of a life bereft of influence, prestige, status, power, being important, being somebody. Very often it's people won't think I'm smart. People only think I'm smart if I believe what the smart people are supposed to believe. Well, you're never going to open your mind. You're never going to be open to that dialogue with an interlocutor that I talked about Mill referring to. If that fear is controlling you, fear that you will end up as an outsider, you won't be somebody important, you won't be regarded as smart. So that, Cornel, is where, that's where I worry. I do see people going after that shiny object of a $140,000 starting salary right out of Princeton. It's just amazing to me.
Is it that high?
I've known cases where, since 2008, it's not quite as common as it used to be. But it's what worries me more is what that represents in terms of an obsession with being important, fitting in, being among the smart crowd, being among the people who count. We get our status by being among the people who count, and we don't want to lose that. And openness of the sort that is central to liberal arts learning means you put these things at risk. Do you agree with that?
No, I do, and I think you're right about the way in which status goes hand in hand with money. We were talking to Sister Dean Dolan about the forces of a pre-professional education, majoring in economics or majoring in computer science or majoring in something that would be efficacious for making the move from undergrad to either hedge fund or whatever it is. And I do believe that you can never measure anybody just by what they majored in. I mean, Norman Mailer majored in aeronautical engineering. Nobody would have thought he'd end up being a novelist. Out of control half the time, but a fascinating novelist. Or Wittgenstein studying engineering and ended up being the major philosopher of the 20th century alongside Whitehead and Dewey and Heidegger. So that it's true that you can choose a major and end up doing a number of different things, but that pre-professional pressure, I mean, one of the saddest things is to talk to a sophomore that's already planning on their professional career and what particular job before they get a chance to really experience genuine paideia. So they don't even know what it's like to recognize that their worldview rests on pudding. That's paideia at work. Calling into question the assumptions and presuppositions you had. You don't have anywhere to go for one. The intellectual dizziness that goes hand in hand with deep education. There's that pre-professional pressure that then takes the form of the status and money and so on.
And that pressure can come from a lot of places. I mean,
loving parents.
Exactly right. Loving parents. You hear what Celeste just said, not just parents. Loving parents who want the best for their children.
That's right.
Genuinely want the best for their children. And Professor West and I are both men of piety. We have the highest love and regard for our parents. Cornel's father is gone, but his mother is a legendary teacher in Sacramento. Has a school actually named for her to honor what she has meant to generations of students. Brother Cornel has met my parents. We were together. You might enjoy this story. We were together at the Supreme Court of the United States. I was being sworn in as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Jill kindly pointed out that I held that position. And when I was being sworn into that position by Chief Justice Roberts, I asked Brother West to come along and hold the Bible for me for the swearing in. And he did. He honored me in that way. And as we were walking into the building, we passed the security officers, the police officers there. And I saw Cornel give a look over to one, and I saw that officer give a look over to Cornel. And I was wondering, they know each other? And Cornel turned to me and he said, Brother Robbie, this is the first time I've ever been to the Supreme Court when I wasn't here to get myself arrested.
By that same brother. But you chose Harriet Tubman's Bible.
That's true.
You chose Harriet Tubman's Bible.
I was sworn into a human rights job. I wanted the Bible, a great human rights hero.
Absolutely.
Remember the wonderful people up in Auburn, New York, at the Harriet Tubman home. Yes. We got in touch with them and asked if they would contribute the Bible, lend the Bible to us for the occasion. It's a magnificent Bible. It tells you something about Harriet Tubman's piety, that she purchased a Bible that must have cost, she was not a wealthy woman, must have cost her 2 years of her income to have this Bible. It's a magnificent Bible. There are photographs we have of it, but the people at the Harriet Tubman home were just so wonderful to work with, and sent the Bible. And then when they learned that the Bible was going to be held by Brother Cornel, well, they were just absolutely thrilled. So that was a very special occasion for me. But it was that occasion that Cornel met my parents, and we had a wonderful time celebrating afterward and so forth. But even loving parents can bring that pressure on students to pre-professionalize, to try to make that professional decision too early, and then to make decisions about courses and majors and their education as a whole based on where this is going to go. I mean, how often have you heard at a party perhaps with relatives or your parents' friends, and if you happen to be an English major, you introduce yourself. I'm a student at Princeton, and they say, "Oh, what are you majoring in?" And you say English, and how often will you hear someone say, "What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that?" I mean, I grew up, by the time I got to college and had decided for philosophy, I was hearing that all the time in the community I lived in when I returned home for the holidays or for family events or what have you. And while piety toward your parents is very, very important, and they're no better guides than your parents, because no one loves you more than your parents do, I think here's an area where if that pressure's coming on you, I think you need to engage your parents and talk with them about the issue, and make the case for the importance of studying what you really do love and are interested in. You're a Princeton student, believe me. I hate to say that anymore because, anyway, believe me, you're going to do okay. You're not going to starve. You're going to have a good career. You can afford to be an English major or a philosophy major, or to go into pure science. You don't have to go into a profession which will fit you out to make a super duper high salary. If you have the love of learning, if we've been able to give you that gift, or you've gotten that gift from your parents or from your school or somehow coming up, you need to run with it. Now, what is on offer? Why is that a gift? Why should you be willing to muster the courage to dedicate yourself to cultivating the virtues of honesty and humility? These are tough things. Courage, honesty, humility, in short supply these days across the board. Why should you be willing to do it? What do you get in return? Let me tell you what I think you get, and I want to see what Professor West has to say on it. I think you get something called self-mastery. By engaging with the great thinkers, exploring the great questions, not only in philosophy or religion or literature, but in the social sciences, in the pure sciences. By pursuing a genuine liberal arts education, going after knowledge, you get mastery of yourself. Leading the examined life means not only that you're not being pushed around by forces external to you, by pressures coming in from the outside. It means you are liberated from slavery to your own passions, desires, emotions, feelings. Plato taught us that in the well-ordered soul, we don't eliminate feeling and emotion and desire, appetite, but rather we bring it under control, under the control of reason. In the disordered soul, by contrast, feeling, desire, appetite has the whip hand. And what happens to reason? What happens to rationality? What we have seen so often in our culture. What Dean Dolan was talking about, what Professor West is talking about. Reason doesn't just disappear. It's not that it just gets wiped out and it goes away. No, it's worse than that. Reason now gets harnessed by emotion, by feeling, by appetite, in the cause of producing rationalizations for choices, for behaviors that cannot be rationally or morally justified, for the pursuit of things that we should not be pursuing, or for an obsession with prestige or status or glory or money or being part of the in crowd or the beautiful people or what have you. that is not truly the way of liberation. Liberal arts has the word liberal, liberty, liberation. But liberation from what? At the end of the day, liberation from what may be the most abject form of slavery at all. Slavery to self. Slavery to one's own wayward feelings and desires. Something over which no one has control but you. No one has control but you. People can take away your physical freedom. They can take away a lot of things. But short of brainwashing, they can't take away your inner freedom, and they can't take away your integrity. But you can give it up. You can lose it. What liberal arts learning holds out the promise of is being your own master, being in control. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, I should add, although there are profound traditions that would go another way on this, that doesn't mean that emotion gets wiped out, that you shouldn't have any feelings, that you should be hard as a rock and cold as steel. That's not the view here. As I say, there are traditions that have that. But you think of the Theravada Buddhist tradition, for example, the concept of anatta, eliminating the self, eliminating emotion, or in some extreme forms of Stoicism. And you may opt for those. Those are options out there, serious traditions. But that's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about not eliminating emotion or destroying it or driving it out or being cold or feelingless, but making sure that emotion is under the control of reason so that what we are acting on in the realm of feeling is what is good and noble and true. Great figures like King or Mother Teresa, or some of the figures Brother Al Rabbitoe writes about in his new book on saints and heroes. These were people who had powerful feelings like compassion, love. And those were motivators. But it was their depth of understanding that made sure that the love was directed toward the right thing, not the wrong thing. That made sure that compassion did not go wayward and lead to atrocity. Do you know anything about the eugenics movement in the 1920s and 30s? Before the Nazis got hold of it, even before the Nazis got hold of it, a lot of people who supported eugenics, racial hygiene, a better human, were people who were moved by compassion. They saw people who were cognitively disabled or physically severely handicapped, and they felt compassion for them. But the compassion could be misguided, it could go astray, it could lead to the conclusion there should be no such people. We should make sure they don't reproduce. We should make sure that they don't continue to suffer in the way that they do. Professor Leonard here at Princeton has written a magnificent new book about how the great institutions of our society, the great and the good, the great foundations and corporations and churches and so forth, went for the eugenics movement. Not because they were haters, but out of a misguided compassion. So what is it that can keep us on the right track and make sure that our emotions, even our good emotions like love and like compassion, are directed in the right way? It's understanding. And that's what liberal arts is offering.
I know we're going to open it up. I just want to have one disagreement about self-mastery. You tell me what you think, my brother. Because I think it shows the degree to which your Thomism, it's much closer to Athens in the sense that
Than to Jerusalem.
The exact in Jerusalem. Because for me, the end and aim is self-surrender in the form of service to others, especially those catching hell. And therefore, the love of truth, beauty, goodness, holy, and so forth is a matter of kenosis, a matter of the emptying of a self and giving of whatever gift you have for tikkun olam, to make the world a better place. Very much like he plays a serious banjo, and we sing together. And I've got a blues sensibility, but can't sing, and he's a bluegrass brother and can sing. And but what we're doing is we're emptying ourselves, surrendering ourselves to present whatever gifts we have in the form of sound to have some impact on the souls, bodies, and hearts of others for empowerment. So that self-mastery is very Socratic. But there's no accident Socrates never cries, he never sheds a tear. Because anybody who's been in love with another person knows self-mastery is an illusion. It's about self-surrender. And when Beckett says, try again, fell better. Try again, fell better. That's closer to the Kierkegaardian tradition that says that given all the quest for self-mastery, the best that we can do in the end is not have this reason somehow subsuming passion, but recognizing reason is indispensable, crucial, fundamental, but in the end, inadequate and insufficient. And what's left? Leaps of faith, or however you want to describe it, you see. So that I know you disagree, but tell me why.
I agree with most of it. I agree with what you affirm,
yes,
but I disagree with what you deny. The denial of the importance, foundational importance of self-mastery. I agree on the importance of self-surrender.
Okay.
But unless we are masters of ourselves, we have no self to surrender. Unless we first have that self-possession, that self-control, we are not being pushed around just by our emotions, which may be very wayward. Unless understanding, reason, rationality has given us that gift, we have no self. We're just a bundle of feelings and emotions and desires and appetites.
Oh, I see.
It's that self-control that gives us the capacity then to empty ourselves. Now, of course, I didn't get the self-surrender. My ability to agree with you 100% about self-surrender, I did not get from Socrates.
You didn't get that from Athens?
Although he was willing to surrender himself for the truth. He was willing to surrender himself, and not just when he drank the hemlock. When the mob pressed him to go with them to murder Leon of Salmis, he refused to go.
He refused to do it.
Believing, turned out he was wrong in the belief, but he fully believed that the net result of his not going along with the mob would be 2 dead bodies rather than 1. Leon would be killed, and he would be killed for refusing to go along. So a utilitarian argument would have said, 1 dead body is better than 2, you know, go ahead, go along, you can't stop it anyway, they're going to kill him, this way they won't kill you. But what Socrates saw was his integrity, of course, was at stake. So he was willing to empty himself for the truth. But the full expression of that, I agree with you, is the heritage of Jerusalem, the Hebrew prophets and Jesus, that we cannot claim we could get to on a pure Platonic or Aristotelian. Or
maybe it's just
pagan
self-restraint or self-discipline or some, I can understand that. Self-mastery has a kind of quasi-absolutist tone, as if self-mastery is something that can actually be achieved. I don't think any one of us fundamentally achieves self-mastery. I just don't see it.
Oh, no, it's like any other virtue.
The regulative ideal.
That's a regulative ideal. That's right. No one has achieved complete courage or complete compassion. All right. We strive
That's true.
for it, and there's a unity of the virtues. So, as Chesterton pointed out, Professor West and I are both fond of quoting Chesterton. As Chesterton pointed out, all of the virtues, for their own integrity, require that they be integrated with all of the others. If you get one without the others, it can really lead you astray. So think of what courage can do if you don't have compassion, if you don't have humility, if you don't have honesty. But you got a lot of courage. You go out and do a lot of damage.
A Nazi soldier supporting apartheid, a patriarchal so-and-so.
So I think that
so-and-so.
I take your point, and I think it's good, but I think that self-mastery...
Okay, to define in that way, I think we're much closer if we get...
Well, we want to open the floor
Yeah,
for a
we
few
do.
questions. Now, Chanel has a microphone down here. I think, is there also a microphone down here? Now, I'm going to follow the Madison, I know a lot of people want to get in. I'm going to follow the Madison program tradition, especially given the nature of this subject matter, and give priority to student questions. Now, those who are not students, please do keep your hands up, because I will get, we don't have a lot of time, I'll try to get to you, but I'm going to take a few questions from the students first. Is that all right? Thank you.
That's fine.
Okay, so someone right down here has it, right in the front row has a question. Yeah.
Thank you, too. You're both incredibly moving storytellers and poets.
Try to speak right into the microphone.
Sorry. So I agree that knowledge, truth, should not be a means to money, status, prestige. But it seems to me that there is another really essential, perhaps even paramount, instrumental value in knowledge and truth that I think Cornel West has touched upon. And maybe I've misconstrued you guys' words. That instrumental value being truth for the sake of good. Knowledge so as to solve all of these crises, catastrophes, as you've called them, that plague us today. To just live in this abstract world of theory and knowledge and truth seems almost indulgent when there are so many really horrific things plaguing us today. So
We get the question, it's a good one. Cornel, you
Yeah,
want
that's
to
a
go
very
first?
good. No, you go right ahead, my brother.
Well, Professor West and I don't always agree on what the good is in a particular case. More often than people realize, we do agree, but sometimes we don't agree. But we certainly agree that among the truths that we should be trying to know, very centrally among those truths, is the truth about the good. We want to know what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. What not only leads to, but constitutes human well-being, human flourishing, in all of its variegated dimensions. And then, you know, as people of conviction, we believe that we've all got an obligation to act on our knowledge of the good and the truth about the good, to come to the aid of those who are victimized or in need or whose rights are being denied. We may have disagreements about what the concrete correct result in this case or that case is, but we all agree on that. Now, having said all that, even for the sake of tikkun olam, for the sanctification of the world, we should not purely instrumentalize our knowledge and treat knowledge that is not of practical significance as if it's of no significance. You can make an error in instrumentalizing knowledge purely to money or what money gets you, prestige, power, influence. Those things, by the way, are not in themselves bad, but they can lead you astray when you worship them, when they become idols, right? But in the same way that you can instrumentalize knowledge in that direction, you can instrumentalize it to good social causes. We're all for you going out and doing it. That's why Professor West goes and gets arrested. You know? But still, we don't want you to think that that's the only point of liberal arts learning. When we ask the question that this forum is about, what is the point of liberal arts learning? We don't want to reduce it even to good causes. We think it has an important role to play in figuring out what is and isn't a good cause, in figuring out how to pursue the good cause once we've decided that this is a good cause. But you still don't want to reduce it just to that. Cornel?
No, I think I agree with that. I think it's true that truth is a species of the good, but the good is not reducible to immediate instrumental deployment. There's ways in which understanding use and instrument, short-term, long-term, there are certain things that are just irreducible. Beethoven's Opus 131, the greatest string quartet ever written, I think, in the West. Is it reducible to anything? No. T.S. Eliot poem, well, what does it really mean? it means what he said. Because it's not reducible, to paraphrase and so forth and so on. And that's just a matter of being truthful about the very phenomena that we're talking about. You see, John Coltrane, Toni Morrison's Beloved, what is it really about? It's about what it's about, because it's too rich to be reduced in that way. But that doesn't mean that that downplays our moral sensibilities in terms of trying to make the world a better place. But you recognize that there are contexts in which both of us work, very much contexts where things are immediate, the crisis is impinging, we respond, but we also recognize a whole host of things about knowledge, arts, humanities, that are not translatable to that immediate crisis. But they have much to do with ways in which we preserve our humanity, sanity, and integrity.
One of our big cultural problems is the loss of a sense that anything is worthwhile or valuable in itself. The tendency to reduce everything just to its instrumental value, or to suppose that the only non-instrumental value is feeling. So we value this or that or the other thing, including knowledge, including pursuing the good, including our relationships with other people, to the extent that they make us feel the way we desire to feel. And that loss of the inherent value of certain things, the things that are not reducible, is at the foundation of a lot of the troubles that we have. And it's very easy to fall into that, where everything just gets instrumentalized. Everything is reduced. Next question. Right down here. And then I'll go back.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation today. My question is very simple. Do we start the liberal arts education too late? And I come to that from an angle, I worked a lot as an advocate in public education policy in high school. Something I struggled a lot with was that instrument, turning education into a means to an end. Our schools, in a lot of ways, have become pre-professional outlets for our students to pursue this education that they perceive not as a pursuit in and of itself, but as a skills-based activity to equip them with the things that they think that they need in the workforce. And they come out not being critical thinkers, as you mentioned, but merely machines who are programmed to give a response when prompted to. So my question is, should we incorporate that earlier, or is it best served at a time when students have achieved this intellectual maturity, when they can really challenge those ideas?
That's a wonderful question. I think it should be available earlier. I think when you actually look at the elite schools for the well-to-do children, you see Paideia begins much earlier, much earlier. Why? Because you have contexts in which what I was talking about before, that formation of attention, cultivation of self, maturation of soul, can set in a community in which Socratic dialogue is enacted with access to the great voices of the dead and some of the voices of the present, of the quick. You see. So I think you're right. I think it should be much earlier. I think that, but it's hard to make it available to people across class and race.
Well, let me say a word about that. One of the reasons it should be earlier, and I believe it can be. I believe that younger students are capable. Now, you're not going to introduce them to Schopenhauer's philosophy, right? Okay, but young people are capable of what used to be called a classical education. So I think it should be earlier, in part to make sure that a liberal arts education is not a luxury of the well-to-do. You can create a kind of class system. The well-to-do get liberal arts educations, and those who come from humbler backgrounds, they're deprived that. And by the way, I think I've talked to Mike Rowe about this. There's a claim to fame. I've talked to Mike Rowe about this, and I'm absolutely persuaded that there is value to being liberally educated, getting a liberal arts education, even if your vocation is to work with your hands, as a carpenter or a plumber, or what have you. If we're right about it being intrinsically enriching and not just a matter of skill acquisition for lawyers and bankers and scientists, then that's got to be true. So I do think we should try to restore in our public and private education the idea of a classical education. It doesn't have to be, it can be adapted. It doesn't have to be just this set of texts or anything like that. But the basic liberal arts approach, I think, can be earlier. And there at least have been some societies in which that has happened, where students have undertaken what we know as a liberal arts education at a fairly early age. I'm going to move now back. Yes, over here.
All right, I'll stand. So you guys talk about pre-professional majors in college and stuff like that and higher education in very insightful ways. But the way, at least that my Chinese parents have marketed pre-professional majors to me is that it's kind of a requisite for survival. So couldn't it be argued that you need to be able to survive, you need to be able to have a skill set to provide for yourself and stand on your own 2 feet before you really start worrying about deep education and profound meaning in life and et cetera?
Well, people need to eat. They need shelter, and they need clothing, and they need to be able to take care of their families. And at a certain level, that's got to be prioritized. That's the sense in which a liberal arts education for anybody is a bit of a luxury. But we can afford it in this society. We're able to do it, and I hope that other societies will be brought, those that don't have that blessing, will be brought to the point at which they will. For students at Princeton, as I said before, you guys are going to do okay. You're going to eat. If you're worried about being an English major or being a philosophy major or being a math major, although that's probably safer, people are after employers are after math majors, but if you're interested in pure science and you're worried that if I go down this route, I'm not going to have a roof over my head, I'm not going to have food on the table, I'm not going to be able to marry and have a family, well, you're not thinking straight then. You're going to do okay. Now, it might, depending on where the winds blow you, it might mean that you are going to end up in a less than glamorous, you might be a professor, rather than a New York investment banker or hedge fund operator or Hollywood magnate or what have you. But if you get to that point, you'll be happy about it. But I take my word for it. You'll be not to look down on hedge funds and Hollywood magnates and things like that. If you get to that point, you're there because you've seen the value, the inherent value of a liberal arts education. Cornel and I were in Dallas a few years ago. We were speaking at a very fancy prep school in what Cornel calls the vanilla side of town. I think it was called St. What's the Episcopal? What's the famous? Anybody here from a famous prep school in Dallas? No. Okay. Well, it was a famous prep school in Dallas, and Cornel happened to know that across town, on the chocolate side of town, there was another prep school. It was run by a wonderful couple, Dr. and Mrs. Flowers, African-American couple, on a shoestring. I mean, they were just barely surviving.
No, it's true.
But Cornel insisted, and I'm so glad that he did, that we go and do a presentation at that school. I think it was called St. Stephen's?
St. Stephen's, yeah.
Like the one we had done at the fancy prep school on the other side of town. And what a wonderful experience that was. Because these young men and women, 100% black. Right? I don't think
I
white
think
kids.
Brother Robbie was the only vanilla brother in the whole world. It's like Negroes in the National Hockey League.
But these kids were 9, 10, 11 years old. The Flowers and the teachers who had joined the Flowers in educating these children had given them the resources that enabled them in their engagement with us, like the engagement we're having here with you today, to ask the most wonderful, deep, serious, morally serious questions, and to engage with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At Paideia at that level.
It really was. I mean,
At that age,
and it was,
that
in
age.
this case, it was just a sheer act of love on the part of this couple and the teachers they had gathered around them because they didn't have the money. And the kids, the amazing thing was the kids had risen to the occasion. Now these, believe me, again, sorry, these kids were the children of prostitutes, drug addicts, no fathers in sight in many cases. They were being provided even evening meals 3 days a week, I believe. It was 3 or 4 days a week because there was a concern whether there would be a meal to go home to. They were dressed in nice uniforms like in the Catholic schools in the old days and maybe even today. But what was amazing was what we were able to observe from interacting with those kids about what the Flowers and their staff had already done with them, had already opened their minds and hearts to the love of learning. So if that can be done in that place, it should be done everywhere we can get it done. Time for one more question. You know, you had your hand up before anybody else did, so I'm gonna give you the final word. Chanel, she's right down here. Chanel, am I right that we're over time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. And you started talking about your autobiographies first, and then you moved on to talking about instrumental education and then non-instrumental education as inherently good. But I wonder, and I kind of feel like you talked about a third kind of education, which let's just call transformative education, where you talked about looking into yourself, having the courage to look into yourself, to examine your lives, and in some way to make sense of your life in relation to these other things. And I wonder if that's a third area that we don't name, you know, and that really what we should be looking at is not mastery through the non-instrumental, but an integration of these three types of education. And when talking about the transformational, I particularly myself am influenced by Paulo Freire, looking at transcendence as a form of liberation, being able to hear your own story and understand it in relation to the other two kinds of education.
Cornel?
No, I appreciate that question. And I think of Paulo Freire, you think of Miles Horton, other transformational thinkers when it comes to education. For me, that's a particular kind of paideia. It's a radical democratic version of paideia. What John Dewey has in mind in his classic of 1916, Democracy and Education. That education is for this self-interrogation and examination for transformation. Citizen in a democratic regime, human being in the world, member of the species, with ecological and Anthropocene emerging, and so forth. So that for me, we wouldn't need a third one. We just need a radical democratic version of paideia with all of the rich resonances of the Socratic legacy of Athens and the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem.
I certainly think that a sound education will be transformative because you're taking raw material and you're making something out of it. That's always a transformation. So I do think that's good. I'm not sure if that represents a third dimension or not, because I think that's just what a sound education, certainly a liberal arts education, does. Only one little warning bell went off in my head when you noted that, and it may be misguided, but I worry about a little too much introspection. We live in a time when we think an awful lot about ourselves. I have borrowed a phrase from a late friend called the cult of the imperial self. We've established the cult of the imperial self. And I worry about that. I think a sound education will lead us to be self-critical. That's what that intellectual humility produces. Our recognition that we could be wrong. Our desire to right the wrong when we are wrong, to get nearer the truth when we're mistaken. So self-criticism I get. And when we benefit from that, it's in terms of transformation. We see things differently. We improve ourselves. But I wouldn't want that to reduce to a kind of focus on the self, an introspection that always has me worrying about just myself. That's why I think it's very important for education to be dialogical. We're always interacting with other people. I'm even a little skeptical of online education. I realize you're interacting with people virtually in that way. But it doesn't take you out of the self nearly as much as education when you're interacting with your fellow students and actually interacting with the physical presence of your professor. I think liberal arts education is inherently dialogical. You can't really quite do it just in a room with books. You know, maybe the great masters can get pretty close, but even they, I think, can't really do it without the human interaction, which is also the vaccine against getting excessively introspective. Well, thank you all for coming out to be with us. Special thanks to Joe Dolan.